Everyone around the world. I think we can take our seats back, and if anyone is requiring tea or coffee, so that can be served here on the table. So we are on track, and we would like to start the last session for today, which is on enhancing the utility system resiliency. So for this, I would like to call upon Mr. Amit Prothi, the keynote for today. Mr. Amit Prothi is the Director General for Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Mr. Prothi brings a wealth of international experience and expertise on climate and disaster resilience issues. He is an international expert with nearly 25 years of progressive leadership in the field of urban planning and resilient infrastructure, with experience across more than 15 countries in North America, Asia, and Europe. We welcome you, sir. The moderator for today, for particular session is Mr. Dr. R. Nagaraja. Dr. Nagaraja is the founder and managing director of this Power Research and Development Consultant Private Limited, India. He has vast experience of 35 years in the field of power system simulation consulting. His specialization includes power system analysis, operations, power engineering, education, and power system protection. He has conducted several power system studies and analyzed many grid disturbances both in India and outside country. He is the architecture and chief mentor for the design and development of the MI power system analysis software package widely used by electric utilities industries consultant and educational institution for power system analysis and research purposes. We welcome you, sir. The speaker for today's session is Mr. Matthias. Mr. Matthias is the managing director of 8KU Berlin, working for a group of large municipal utilities in the field of energy policies and economy in Berlin. He is specialized in renewable energy, integration of energy systems, power generation, and the heating sector in Germany and in Europe. We welcome you, sir. The next speaker for today is Mr. Mohammad Kausar Amir Ali. Mr. Mohammad Kausar Amir Ali is BSc in Mechanical Engineering and is currently the Managing Director at DESCO Bangladesh. His area of interest includes tariff management, commercial operation management, prepayment metering management, implementing geographical information, mapping in BPDS, distribution zone, working on underground and SCADA projects of BPDB distribution zones, working on establishing enterprise resource planning in BPDP, upgrading of Electricity Act, and now working for preparation of electricity rules, contributed in establishing South Zone Power Distribution Company Limited, and many more. We welcome you, sir. The next speaker is Mr. Saurabh Shah. I think we'll repeat. Now, I would like to call upon Mr. Shahnawaz Ahmed. Mr. Shahnawaz Ahmed is Senior Advisor for World Nuclear Association London. He has wide range experience in the nuclear sector, having worked at senior level in various national and international organizations. Mr. Ahmed has a number of publications to his credit. He has also traveled and lectured widely. We welcome you, sir. Last but not the least, an important guest, Mr. Yusuf Muhammad Al-Mahrouqi. Mr. Yusuf Muhammad Al-Mahrouqi is the Chief Distribution Officer at Muscat Electricity Distribution Company. He holds a master degree in electrical network planning and master degree in business administration. He had intensive experience in regulatory framework and setting companies' price control. Also had promoted number of network improvement initiatives, including reduction of SAIDI and SAIFI and digitalization of maintenance activities using GIS. We welcome all the panelists, all the speakers, keynote and moderator. Mr. Saurabh Shah will join shortly. Over to moderator.
Good evening to all. I request Mr. Amit Prothi to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know it's afternoon, post-tea, energy levels are starting to go down. I'm here to talk about resilience. So I represent an organization called the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And what we are really talking about is, you're all providing the energy. I'm actually talking about the services to people and disruptions to services to people. If you look around what has happened even 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago in Turkey, images behind me, I was thinking whether I should show them to you or not, get you to close your eyes for a minute and say, when you think about failure of energy systems, what do you actually imagine? A lot of you are thinking at the asset level, maybe it's the mechanical failure, maybe it's something to do with heat, maybe it's something to do with personnel not monitoring something on time. But there's a larger issue that I'm going to talk about today, which is really about the changing climate, the changing patterns of risk that all of the infrastructure that we are currently building will be experiencing. So even in the images at the back, or you're looking at failure that could be related to earthquakes. You're looking at failure that could be related to cyclones. You're looking at failure that could be related to flooding, coastal storms, etc., etc., etc. And why is that important? And if you just look at some examples from very recent times, which all of us should remember, Cyclone Fani in Odisha in 2019, more than 10 million consumers of entire coastal Odisha grappled with the inconvenience of disruption in power and water supply. It took more than 2 weeks to restore power in large parts of the eastern coast of India. And that resulted in economic losses of more than US 9 billion and almost 1.3 billion losses in terms of damage to the power infrastructure, which includes loss of revenue for the utility. If you look at Cyclone Winston in Fiji in 2017, the Winston was the biggest storm ever recorded in the southern hemisphere, impacted 62% of Fiji population and caused Fijian $2 billion in damage, which was 20% of the GDP. The national power grid was devastated with an estimated 41% of national power grid damaged. Hurricane Sandy in the USA. So again, these issues are not just one part of the world, one kind of economy. It's actually affecting a lot of different parts of the world. Hurricane Sandy in USA in 2012 caused massive power outages in the Northeast. According to the Department of Energy's Office of Electricity Reliability and Delivery, about 8.5 million customers were without power at some point during or after the storm, mostly in parts of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and the Ohio Valley. If somebody is familiar with the US, these are some of the most affluent parts of the country. The day Hurricane Sandy made landfall, 8.2 million customers were without power. For New Jersey, it was the largest power outage in the history of the state, where loss of power lasted for about 9 days. Now these are numbers, these are when you start aggregating them, these start amounting to huge losses, both in the asset but also in the services that they provide. And why is services important? I always try to reflect back on my own experience. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. in 2012. This was the same year that Hurricane Sandy hit. I happened to be there in July, living there with a young baby, and there was a storm. It was actually a normal storm. But DC lost power for 7 days. Now, I'm a middle-class person. All of us are middle-class people. We have, our backups and backups and backups. But which was the most popular place in those 7 days was a bookstore called Barnes and Nobles. Why? Because everybody was lining up there to charge their phones, right? What was the disaster? The disaster was not being able to communicate. The disaster was not having access to energy. The disaster was, I had a 4-month-old baby at that time. Finding friends who had power so that my 4-month-old baby, this is July, heat in Delhi gets to be really hot. When you start thinking about the impact of energy system failure, it's actually about the people who are being served by that system. That's what we need to think about. It's not about the asset is of course important for all of you from a financial point of view, but actually it's the services that that asset is providing that is critical. And when you start thinking about what climate change is bringing, we already had the hottest March last year in this part of the world. Today is already hotter than, last few Februaries. I remember February being a wonderful time. This morning, I don't know how many of you woke up in your houses and found it to be really, really hot, right? Oh, gone are suddenly the warm quilts that we're all sleeping with. I couldn't sleep at night last night, right? But these are the realities that we will have to face. We're already facing, we will have to face going forward. Which means that the burden on your energy system, suddenly the demand that you were expecting to really start coming around in late, early March, April, is now coming much faster and lasting longer. And as you're thinking about your asset itself, all of these variables, when you think about coastal areas, you design your systems to be resilient to cyclones. Now, already studies are showing cyclone patterns are changing. And cyclone patterns are changing where wind speeds and gust speeds are increasing at rates that we weren't expecting them to, and faster than that we were expecting them to. And everything that you're designing today has to last you. The previous session, there was this person who was talking about 60-year lifespan of an asset. We're already in 2023. 60 years means 2083 is by the time your asset is actually going to last. And already, if you look at the IPCC reports, you're seeing climate change. We're already 1.1 degrees warmer. We're going to go beyond 1.5 degrees. So extreme heat becomes an issue. Cyclones and variability of cyclones and gust speeds becomes an issue. Variability in precipitation, which means flooding, becomes an issue. And all of these interact with the assets that all of you are thinking about. So when I think about resilience, it's actually making sure, how do we make sure that people who need the services that electricity systems are providing, whether it's for their lives, but also for livelihoods, whether it's the hospital, the schools, the baby care, I needed baby care, the charging of batteries. So it's actually about the services. And when we think about resilience, it's the asset resilience to withstand all of these uncertainties, but it's also understanding that there might be moments that asset fails. Asset failure is very much part of the resilience journey, which you may not need to think about, but on the public sector side, one has to think about, if there is a failure in the asset, how do you make sure it doesn't become a disaster? An earthquake by itself is not a disaster. A cyclone by itself is not a disaster. It's when the system fails, when services fail, that it becomes a disaster. So on that note, I look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Amit Proti. You have touched upon the requirement of the development of a resilient system. I would like to see whether any questions from the audience. I think if there are any questions to the keynote speaker, I request you to kindly. Fine then. If there are no questions, I would like to make the moderator pitch for this session, so that we'll try to see how best we'll be able to take up in the plenary part of this session. Enhancing the utility system resiliency, we have got 5 great speakers in this session. I would like to make the pitch for this session so that actually we are all in the same boat to address the resilience problem. What has happened worldwide is increase in the severity and also the impact of the natural disasters. The frequency of the cyclones, frequency of the natural disasters are increasing, and also the impact is also increasing. They are affecting our critical infrastructure. We have looked into the previous session the asset management. Asset management is fine, but how to create a resilient asset, that is also equally important. Let's try to look into that. When you talk about the various events that happen following a disaster are stochastic events, hazards that are going to occur, and exposure of our electrical assets, vulnerability, where actually which part of the electrical assets, infrastructure, they are vulnerable, and how to find the finance. We have the speaker from the Power Finance Corporation also, how to fund these projects that are equally important. Therefore, we need to identify what part of my network in my geographical area is getting affected. Is it from 10 kilometers from the coastal region? Is it from 40 kilometers from the coastal region? Or in the same geography, same wind zone, one tower has got affected, the other tower has not affected. What is the reason for that? Even that we need to check. Is it actually a erection defect or a manufacturing defect, or it is a problem with the standard itself? Those are the things we need to look in. What are the way forward as part of this asset management? Strengthening the infrastructure resiliency governance, which is very much essential, so that actually we need to see that at the distribution level, transmission level, at the generation level, resilience is built in as part of our standards. Risk assessment and also the resilience planning. We have the speakers from the distribution companies. I would like to see that actually how they are planning the resiliency of their system. Whenever the disaster occurs or whenever a catastrophic occurs, we need to start collecting the data. How to improve the data collection is also an equal challenge. Adequate financing and also the capacity building. How to train the people? Are they geared up? For example, when the COVID-19 occurred across the globe, people were not geared up. Similar to that, when the infrastructure disaster happens and our electrical utilities are getting affected, what is the capacity building that is required? Even that we need to address as part of developing a resilient system. We are missing Narasimhan, one of the speakers. But one thing what we have seen is, when the grids are getting interconnected, more and more risks are there. When the grids are getting interconnected, for example, India, we have seen 600 million people getting affected in the 2012 grid collapse. Similarly, if you see the last 3-4 incidences, problem can be anything, but is it possible to build the resilience in the system? Some of the grid-related disturbances are maybe due to lack of the generation, lack of the grid discipline, but is it possible to do the resiliency, build the resilience into the system? We need to look for. The other thing is, I keep telling that achieving a grid collapse is not that easy. Even the load dispatch operator, they try to see that in their life, somewhere, they have got an inherent desire that they should see a grid collapse. Touch wood, this should not happen. But what is important is, there is a planning barrier, there is a best operational barrier, there is a protection barrier. Therefore, we need to see how to bring the resiliency in our system, overcoming all these barriers, then only there can be a grid collapse. Therefore, that is what we need to address as part of the grid operations in our resiliency system. Funding. Who is going to fund? Finally, for a disaster, if the fund has to come, all the consumers are getting affected if it is going to be an asset that is created as part of the tariff revision. Therefore, how to fund, it is also equally important. Therefore, whenever you look at the disaster funding, the various disasters that have happened, each and every disaster has caused the huge investment from the government. Therefore, the thing is, who is going to fund the disaster? Therefore, we have the great panelists. I would like to see that actually these things are addressed as part of this discussion so that we'll be able to deliberate. Now, I request Mr. Mathur to come and deliberate on his dialogue. Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. Chairman, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me today to speak about resilience. And I will do this not so much in a technical manner, but from a leadership or management perspective. So to begin with, I will be very clear on what resilience to my mind is. It is not on things we know that they will happen. It is not on things we know that they might happen, but to my mind, resilience is to things we do not know yet, that many people cannot even imagine that they might happen or might happen together with other things. Now, let me briefly introduce myself. You know, my name is Matthias Dümpelmann. I'm working for 8KU, which is a group of large municipal utilities in Germany. You know the cities like Munich, Cologne, or Frankfurt, 8 of them. Before that, I was head of corporate strategy of one of these companies. Before that, I began my career as an advisor in the German Bundestag, just like Winfried Damm did, we heard a couple of minutes ago. So, as I said, my focus on resilience is not that much a technical one, it's on management and leadership. So, first of all, there are things that are known. Everyone knows that these things can happen. Of course, the grid can break down. Therefore, just a second, Therefore, you have the N-1 principle, which means that security of supply will be granted even if a component fails. System operators are responsible not only to provide customers with electricity, but also to prevent other components from overloads. In fact, there is also an N-2 principle, which means that the failure of one component and the simultaneous failure of another one is compensated. This strategy is limited to large industrial customers with the risk of losing their machinery during a breakout. But a second example of threats is when we know overload of the grid in times of intense wind or PV infeed. Advanced control strategies match meteorological and customer data to prevent redispatch or even overloads. However, you must stick to these strategies. And what if not? And what if not? There is one good example from the year of 2006. The Meyer Werft in Papenburg is famous for building large and very, very large cruise liners. However, the shipyard has no direct access to the open sea, but has to use the river Ems. You see it on the left-hand side. It's a really tiny river. Must use this river to get the ships to the open sea. The Ems is crossed by large transmission grids, which are switched off when large ships run down the river to the sea. And of course, switching off a large grid has to be communicated to neighboring TSOs to have them prepare the situation. In 2006, the Ems crossing grid was switched off 3 hours earlier than previously announced. The N-1 principle was violated. The other TSOs couldn't react in time due to the ongoing market procedures and the very huge wind infeed in northern Germany, which stressed the grid even more. Consequently, various lines were switched off. The European transmission grid was switched into 3 parts, and there were breakdowns even down in Spain. Remember, from northern Germany down to Spain. I will, for reasons of time, skip what happens if you don't stick to what sustainability will tell you. And maybe you remember it was a big flood catastrophe in Germany. And this is not somewhere in different parts of the world, but it's in so-called highly civilized Germany. So just one thing on sustainability, it becomes even more important part of flood prevention. Unfortunately, politics and administration were too slow in reacting to the disaster. Now to my real point, there are things we do not know yet, and many people cannot even think that they, will happen someday. Growing uncertainty and complexity is the major challenge of modern societies and companies. One could also say that in these situations, 2 negative factors not only add up to a disaster, they rather have a simultaneous exponential effect. Once this occurred in the western part of Germany in the year of 2005, which was sort of a tiny disaster. Specific weather conditions, not too bad altogether, but very specific. Extremely humid air with lots of wet snows and tons of ice, coincided with high voltage poles made of steel with a high fraction of nitrogen. long-lasting material, but fragile when cold. You see the result on the left-hand side. Fortunately, nothing severe happened, but there was a breakdown of around 4 days in the wintertime, just before Christmas, affecting the life of 250,000 people. Consequently, the TSO changed or renovated about 44,000 poles during the next year. The coincidence of two factors with exponential effects can unfortunately cause real catastrophes. My last example is Fukushima, Daiichi. The disaster is widely known and discussed, but there is a specific point in the whole story. It was not only a natural catastrophe, the most extreme earthquake in Japan, in the Japanese Sea, followed by a real series of tsunamis, but also a type of management and leadership which made the staff anxious of taking decisions under extreme uncertainty. They were cut off from communication with the executive management in Tokyo. They were afraid of doing anything which could risk the power plant in itself or increase the disaster. Less known is what happened in the neighboring plant Fukushima Daini, few kilometers off Daiichi. Fortunately, the head of power plant was courageous enough to perceive that he was in an unknown situation of complete uncertainty. So he, together with the staff, decided not to stick to standard operation procedures given by the management, but to act with the combined experience of the staff. Together, they avoided the nuclear meltdown and explosions of radioactive material. A couple of colleagues of mine and friends in Germany are heads of power plants, and they thoroughly feel responsible for what they're doing, for their plant, for their staff, and for their customers. They are proud of it, and they are proud by knowledge and responsibility. This is what leadership can be. Their obvious independence is not given by standard procedures, but by experience. To some extent, this is exactly what India-born Ranjay Gulati, Harvard professor of management, calls resilience by management. To sum up, resilience is of vital importance in order to cope with exploding complexity which can, given the fact of climate change, lead to exponential effects. Resilience is into moderating the impact of disasters, if it was impossible to avoid them, and to adapt to changing conditions. Of course, it is the management of the unexpected, using technical devices and sticking to the pillars of prediction, prevention, protection, and adaptation. Even more, it is sustainability. But to my mind, it is on management and leadership. Empower your staff for resilience. Thank you very much.
We can take one or two questions from the audience. Please. You can introduce yourself and then ask the questions.
My name is Bikash John. I'm MD DPDC, Bangladesh. Very nice to hear from two speakers regarding the resilience. First of all, I'm very much pleased to hear from Mr. Amit. He said that natural disaster is not a disaster, actually. The asset disaster is the big disaster, really, really. I agree with you. And again, Mr. Mathur said that a lot of preparation should be done, like and management preparation, administration, management, people. My question is that I'm working in a utility. So for a utility, what is the summarized way? How we can go forward to be resilient? And what should be the challenges to developing this resilient metrics? Thank you.
So you're asking what the German did about this TSO disaster or small disaster. It was an adaptation of regulations. It was a thorough analysis how all these things could happen, and the learning, of course, and to prevent to prevent things from happening again. On the other hand, and this is what I was stressing in my speech, it's on the staff to be really careful with what they do, not to simply stick to standard procedures, but to really look what happens. Only when these two things together are combined, you can, for a longer future, prevent your company, your assets, your utility from being broken down by the sudden coincidence of two, as I said, negative factors. So it's regulation, it's technology, and it's management. And this is what we try to do in Germany. We're not perfect, not at all.
So I think one thing from the resilience perspective we talk a lot about is vulnerabilities. When you're looking at your assets, the asset is not equally at risk everywhere. And when you're trying to understand which part may be more prone to failure, then you can actually intervene to strengthen that part. So the management is incredibly important, but also starting to understand, we did a study in Odisha, for example, where we realized that gust speeds were changing, but the pattern of change was different 1 kilometer from the coast, 5 kilometers from the coast, 20 kilometers from the coast. So when you need to make interventions, for example, or when you're investing in new assets, a better understanding of those risks may help you prepare better to avoid future disaster. So, if your gust speed is changing, it's 150 kilometers at the coast, 130 kilometers inland, further in it's 120, then your design of the asset also should change accordingly. And that's where you look at the transmission system. Undergrounding maybe needs to happen in some parts because the overhead line will collapse because you aren't ready to withstand 150 plus winds. So a nuanced understanding of the risk also becomes important because it all goes back to investments. What is it that you're going to invest in to enhance the resiliency of that asset?
Thank you. I request Mr. Mohammad Kausur to make his insight into this resilience system.
To President and the colleagues and the participant, good evening. I am thanks to IMA to give me a chance to do something here. Today, my subject is enhancing the utility system resiliency. It is DESCO Outlook. I am Mohammad Kausar Amir Ali, Managing Director, DESCO, Bangladesh. Resiliency is the ability to cope with and recover from incapacitation. The term resilience in the power system has several attributes, ranging from the ability of a power system to resist and recover from a disrupting event to the ability to proactively respond to potential disrupting events and newly emerging threat. The disruption could be a natural threat or man-made miseries such as a cyber attack. Blackout due to the cyber attack and the technical issues have been increasing nowadays. For example, the cyber attack in the Ukraine power grid in 2015 caused power outage to approximately 225,000 customers. Recently, June 16, 2019, blackout in South America causes the power outage to more than 48 million customers. Most recently, the power outage, August 2019, the capital of Indonesia caused the power outage to more than 10 million customers. In Bangladesh, we also face the natural disaster like cyclone. We have faced it is in 2007 by Cedar and 2014 another cyclone. And in that time, total Bangladesh blackout is come out. Thus, the 5 Rs of the energy resiliency, the robustness, redundancy, resourcefulness, response and recovery are the important attribute of withstanding, responding to and recovery from disruption. Resiliency being defined in terms of ability of power system to withstand within an acceptable level and recover within the acceptable time and cost. Dhaka, the capital city, is the financial, commercial and entertainment capital of Bangladesh and accounts for up to 35% of the Bangladesh economy. In Bangladesh, the electricity demand is increasing along with a steady GDP growth of around 6%. Meanwhile, the government has achieved its declaration vision 2021 to provide electricity for all by the golden jubilee years of independence. Now the government of Bangladesh has a dream to become a high-income country by 2041, and the country plans to increase its power capacity to 16,000 megawatt by 2041 as per Integrated Power and Energy Master Plan. Dhaka Electric Supply Company Limited is a leading electricity distribution company committed to supply reliable electric power within the major part of Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. DESCO, founded as a public limited company on November 1996 and started its commercial operation in 1998. In subsequent years of successful operation and performance, now the total area DESCO is approximately 245 square kilometer. Enhancing the resiliency of a utility system refers to make it better able to withstand and recover from any kind of interruption that can disrupt electricity. It is also about the limiting the consequence and disruption caused by the outage while the power is out, restoring service rapidly afterwards and learning from these experience in order to better deal with event in future. Presently, the SAIDI and SAIFI, that is the System Average Interruption Duration Index and System Average Interruption Frequency Index, are 455 minutes per year per customer and 22 interruption per year per customer respectively, and the trends is given in the graph. To prevent the wide area power outage, especially during the thunderstorm, cyclone, rainy season, or any other natural calamity, DESCO is continuously upgrading its existing infrastructure by replacing outdated equipment with modern and efficient one and maintain the proper right-of-way. Additionally, DESCO is expanding its network by adding more distribution lines and substation. DESCO follows the N-1 criteria, which is the reliability in the power system industry for system planning and design. With a positive approach, DESCO has taken some initiative and adopt state-of-art technology to enhance the resiliency of its distribution system to serve the quality power to the consumer. DESCO has implemented the SCADA system. All the equipment up to 132 kV, 33 kV and 11 kV level is monitoring by this SCADA system. Real-time loading data, network optimization, load flow study, and automatic SCIFI can be calculated from the SCADA system. Ring main unit, that is RMU, will be included under the supervision of the SCADA for more resilience. DESCO is implementing a project on design, development and installation of multi-platform GIS-based application for the management of the distribution network. With the help of this mapping, the geolocation of any asset or customer in DESCO area would be found easily and service could restore very quickly. Besides, online complaint management system also is implementing using the GIS mapping in DESCO area for more resiliency. As the underground distribution system is more reliable to compare to overhead system. Thus, DESCO is planning to go for underground distribution network in its jurisdiction phase by phase. At present, 132 kV and 33 kV lines are undergrounded in DESCO area. Besides, DESCO has implemented 2 pilot projects on underground distribution system. After successful completion, next step will be taken. Though the implementation and operation, the cost is very high for underground system, DESCO is working ahead to underground distribution system to make its distribution system more resilient. Almost 42 megawatt solar home system in 36,000 households and 410 numbers of net metering have been installed in DESCO jurisdiction. Net metering can save the hundreds of dollars on their utility bills every year, so DESCO encouraging customers to be a promouser to save the money as well as to reduce the pressure of load demand in the national grid. DESCO, a pilot project is considered to cover the existing system into the modern technology-based automation system in Gulshan adjacent area. DESCO has implemented a Tier 3 certified master information center that centralizes all the shared IT operations and equipment of the organization for the storing, processing and disseminating data. For the data interoperability and information security, DESCO ensured the master information center has to offer a secure environment that minimizes the changes of a security. Advanced metering infrastructure provides electricity, power utilities to a communication system to control the center to meter as well as the ability to modify the customer's several level of parameters with real-time data and load profiles. AMI systems are connected to the internet and other networks and can be vulnerable to cyber attacks. Cyber criminals may attempt to gain unauthorized access to the AMI system in order to steal sensitive customer data, manipulate meter readings, or disrupt the overall operation of the power system. To keep this issue in mind, DESCO is considering cybersecurity as an important benchmark when implementing the advanced metering infrastructure. Electric vehicle charging station can play a role of enhancing the utility system resiliency by providing the alternate source of energy to power EVs and reduce the needs of fossil fuel. Electricity is essential for our day-by-day lives, although the several studies have been conducted to provide a clear definition to power system resilience. It has not yet been standardized, but the ultimate goal to minimize the impact of the disruption, reduce downtime, and ensure the system can be quick return to the normal operations after an incident so that our valuable customer can be get power. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from the audience? Sir, I have a question. You are more dependent on the oil and also the natural gas. I think recently you are seeing the energy crisis. Whether the interconnection with the Indian grid is going to enhance the resiliency, and if so, what is the roadmap from Bangladesh?
Thank you very much. Yes, the deficiency of electricity due to primary fuels. We are interconnected with India and import electricity from India. We have a roadmap to near country Bhutan and Nepal. They have the potential of hydroelectricity, and Bangladesh government is trying to have a collaboration with Nepal and Bhutan so that we can buy power from them. To connect with the Nepal and Bhutan, we have an advantage. Like that, in hot season, Bangladesh need more power, but Nepal and Bhutan needs less power, but they can produce electricity. But in winter season, Bangladesh needs less power. That time, Nepal and Bhutan needs more power, but in that time, they cannot produce the more power. So we can try in this way to resolve this matter, and it will be more economic for us also. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. Saurav Shah, IPS, from the Power Finance Corporation. Most of the utilities in India always look for him for the money. Therefore, I would like to see how he is going to support the resilience system when actually there is no return on the investment. I would like to Mr. Saurav Shah to talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Prothi and Dr. Nagaraja, and very good afternoon to all my fellow panelists and everyone in this hall. I'll just start with basic understanding about what I'll just, for the benefit of foreign participants also, Power Finance Corporation, the organization I represent, I'm an Indian civil servant, I'm from the police service. I've worked in law enforcement, further I've worked in coal sector, railways, and now I look after power distribution sector. So, previous experiences also help you understand, how the various challenges that we see on ground. Coming to my organization, Power Finance Corporation, I'm an executive director there, and I look after mainly the government scheme implementation. So India has had a culture, electricity is a concurrent subject in India. the kind of federal structure we have. There are subjects divided between state and center. The federal government has a lot of subjects that the federal government alone looks after. There are certain subjects with states alone, but electricity being a very different kind of sector where you have certain policy making priorities and which have a lot of interstate ramifications that are essentially looked after by Government of India. The planning for generation and how we match our resources. And being a country of vivid geographies, varieties, we have certain potentialities in different regions, and different parts of the country have different generation possibilities and different usage patterns across the year. So the central government tries its best to match these patterns so that demand supply and there is further flattening of demand in a manner that we produce closer. I mean, our supply demand mismatch is at the very minimum. Power Finance Corporation is both a government agency in the sense that we look after the distribution infra, the policy making part. We carry the feedback from the state distribution companies and even the private distribution companies, and then we bring it to the notice of Ministry of Power, wherein it feeds into the policy making cycle, and then we come out with certain schemes which are tailored to the requirement of our distribution companies. Also, as a NBFC, Power Finance Corporation, along with its subsidiary REC, has huge assets across generation, transmission, distribution space, and even in certain electromechanical categories which lie beyond the direct energy sector. When we come to the subject of utility system resiliency, I'll just aside about the country also. Our journey from adequacy and sufficiency is now going in the direction of viability and reliability. These are the key parameters that we look after in our schemes now. We had earlier schemes called Deen Dayal, Gramin, Vidyutikaran Yojana, IPDS, where the main goal was to ensure sufficiency of power, lighting up the last household, lighting up the last village. Now that we have reached there, we want our discoms to be self-sufficient. We want them to fiscally and financially viable for years to come. So this is the area of our effort in the new scheme called Revamped Distribution Sector Scheme. It's a very ambitious scheme with an outlay of almost $40 billion, close to around 3 lakh crore rupees. Over the next 3 to 4 years, we are looking for a smooth rollout of the scheme. We have already done a lot of part of this scheme where the initial administrative reforms have started happening. Tariffs have to be cost reflective, subsidy. So now I'm coming to the part of, when we talk about reliability, resiliency is a part of that. And as we go about state to state, we have a huge coastline, almost 6,100 kilometers. So this is, many of these zones fall in the heavy cyclone or medium cyclone zones, and that is where we have focused our efforts. And we have provided states with an outlay for undergrounding, having different pole types also at certain places, because as Mr. Prothi was saying, we also have to look at the economics. The cost economics have to be favorable. We can't have underground everywhere. Underground would probably be the best solution. But not only it's costly, it takes more time to be implemented. There is a civic cost also in terms of congestion, in terms of traffic disruptions, which is not there with OH. So in areas with probably lesser wind speeds, we can have a different pole type. We can have better grouting also. So we have to balance our demands and availability of resources. Being a huge country with the kind of line length we have and the number of consumers, almost 330 million, we have to balance our needs and our demands, and we have to ensure that all our schemes are able to fulfill every one of these objectives in a similar fashion based on available resources. So the revamped distribution sector scheme looks after loss reduction. The line losses have to be reduced. They have to be brought in the range of 12 to 15% of AT&C levels have to be brought in the level of 12 to 15%. Modernization is another component where we look at a lot of undergrounding, SCADA and DMS systems. Use of SCADA has been very popular in disaster resilience in certain states where in case of urban flooding, RMUs have been utilized to operate systems. And then, of course, smart meter is another of one of the major initiatives, advanced metering system. So, also, when we talk about financing, this finance not being available, we have to understand that when there is a disruption of power infra due to a disaster, that is not just the cost of power infra. When we actually calculate the cost, there is a cost of human life, which is probably, which cannot just be put in any other terms, human enterprise. Then further, there is a breakdown of communication, power is critical to every kind of functionality, be it communication, be it relief, rehabilitation. So we have to look at the wider canvas. So the loss to power infra may be X in numbers. The overall loss to the economy, to human life, I mean, that might be probably 10 times that cost. So if you look at the entire cost, that is humongous. I mean, so we have to look in those terms. The problem with financing will come is when power in India at least is a regulated sector. So every penny that the DISCOM earns, it is after the perusal of the tariff petition by the regulator. So the regulator has to be convinced that this investment is going into a financially viable enterprise. And this is where we need more case studies, where we need to build in more academic rigor so that we are able to get these orders out, where we are able to provide and provision for these infrastructure. So also, I mean, we should not go overboard. We should not be doing all undergrounding. We should probably have a graded approach depending upon the geography and the kind of disaster threat faced by a specific region. So different regions may have different solutions. So in mountainous regions, we have seen that even though, I mean, there is not immediate disaster, say for a black swan event, but there are regular breakdowns because of vegetation, so there could be a covered conductor. So different regions and different geographies and different vegetation types will have different solutions. We can have more fault passage indicators. So besides the natural adversities like cyclone, storm, you also have periodic breakdowns. These may happen from some kind of faults, and say in a hilly region, the detection may take 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. This will cause a loss of revenue. This will cause a disruption of normal life of the consumer also, because the consumer is dependent on power for just everything, mobile recharging, just everything boils down to availability of power. Even heating, I mean, every kind of need is connected to power. So we are also giving a lot of fault passage indicators and any kind of automation which can act as a force multiplier for distribution companies, where they can probably do kind of better crew management and use automation as a force multiplier. Also the human-induced threats, as the system becomes more communicated, as there is a two-way communication, there is more and more possibility of a cyber attack, other kind of attacks. So this is somewhere that we need more and more investment. The loss of data should not be absolute. So we are prescribing a disaster recovery center with every data center we are proposing in all kinds of our new works. Even the old works, I mean, we are proposing that we should have more disaster recovery centers so that data should not be lost absolutely. There could be a relative loss, but the redundancy should be available, not just in terms of infra and network, but also data. Then there is technical threat, I mean, underperformance of assets. Also the issue of EVs and DER. I mean, DER in themselves both are a challenge and also an opportunity. Challenge in the sense that they will overload certain parts of the network. There could be a STU charging its buses at certain places. So how quickly we can change our network geography, not just geography in terms of absolute infra, but also availability of infra, which brings me to another part, which should go hand in hand, the time of day tariff. So this is what the ministry is now proposing, and so that the network usage is optimum, so that we do not peak out our power demand at the same time, leading to more generation needs and obviously, I mean, lower plant load factors, which will also feed into underperforming assets and further, I mean, the kind of malice that goes on into the financial sector from the power generation sector. So I think a lot of other points have already been covered as to what could be the nature of threat and what are the kind of assets which generally fall under threat. So this is our, I mean, basic sense and challenge that utility is being cash trapped because of the payment cycles. We're trying to improve the payment cycle also by the prepaid metering, where the payment cycle can be slightly advanced. And also, I mean, the regulatory atmosphere where you have to convince the regulator for any kind of tariff enhancements. Aged infra, the size, absolute size of infra. And of course, I mean, because at times the management does not have the kind of long-term vision that is needed, I mean, because of the placement, the very frequent changes at the top level of DISCOM management also. So we are also inducing corporate governance guidelines where we can have more continuity of thought leadership at the top level of DISCOMs and the energy sectors of the state also. So the government of India, hand in hand with all states, is trying to change our systems. I mean, not just infra, but also the processes that go into these systems. And we hope, I mean, we'll be able to contribute meaningfully to a changed environment where, I mean, these events are happening with greater frequency because of overall climate change and global warming. India wants to do its bit to both reduce its carbon footprint and also create disaster resilient infra to support. Thank you very much.
Any questions from the audience? Please. So you can just.
Sahab, do you support individual efforts who wants to convert their native villages into solar villages?
At the policy level, I mean, of course, with open access and the change happening in open access, there is a possibility open. And from an enterprise level, of PFC being a financial institution, whatever is open, I mean, as per standard business practices, I'm sure, I mean, if finance is the aspect, I mean, we can look at that aspect.
Some small contribution from your side. Out of your CSR fund or
again, I mean, yes, the company has a CSR policy and we have regular, I mean, we do keep supporting smaller projects also. We support institutions, we support government functions. I mean, we support all kind of solar projects also from CSR. So there is a regular procedure on and it's a year-round activity. We keep doing things like that.
So should I meet you if you don't mind?
You can please, I mean, you can drop a mail to me, you can drop a mail to our CMD also and it will be taken up.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? I have got a question. See, when the 2014 cyclone happened, the CM of Orissa told the Honorable Prime Minister that I don't want the funding every now and then, but I would like to have a system developed which is robust enough so that actually whatever the cyclone that come year on year, that is going to withstand, which requires actually the great aspect of the studies to find out which part of the network gets affected and how to develop. You directly told that actually, rightly told that actually it has to be a gradient type of approach, which implies that actually maybe the coastal region has to be much more strengthened. Away from the coastal, it can be less strengthened. But finally, the studies have to be conducted. Therefore, we would like to see whether you will be able to fund the CDRI to connect those type of studies.
Yes, I mean, I think what happened in 99 and further in 2014 brought us a lot of insight, and we have been doing, I mean, we have more academic understanding and there have been newer innovations. So we are in conversation with DISCOMs in Odisha, in Andhra, in Gujarat, and I mean, there is a lot of local knowledge and there could be, but again, I mean, it's a very long coastline. So when we say coastal, I mean, it cannot be a uniform approach. Within the coastline also, there will be very varied approach depending upon, I mean, we have to look at the sheer size of challenge that awaits us and depending upon where we have more population, where it is, I mean, where probably a line could be shifted inside by a few kilometers in absence of population pocket. I mean, probably these could be approaches. So these things are in process and these things take time also because the cycle only starts happening, the investment only starts happening after we have a understanding. On the other side, there is more technical innovation also happening. So we have newer and newer pole types now. So we also hope that in some places where we were earlier planning underground, it could be overhead now. So we, I mean, as we go, as we are evolving, it's a very dynamic situation, it's a fluid situation, and we are trying to fund as per our availability and to the best of our abilities, and we don't want to see outages that are very long, not just from a revenue perspective, but from the overall human life perspective. I mean, the cost of human life should not be.
Thank you. We have Mr. Shah Nawaz. Okay.
Thank you. Winfried Dahm from GIZ. One more question. Is PFC still financing new coal-fired power plants?
I don't look after all the projects. So, I mean, I mainly look after the government schemes, but if you allow me, I can get back to you. I mean, I'll take your card, I'll get back to you on this. Thank you.
We have Mr. Shah Nawaz, Senior Advisor from the World Nuclear Association. He is the great admirer of WS from 2016 when it was started as a baby. I would like to ask him to touch upon how actually the nuclear power can have the enhance the resiliency of our power system.
Well, I come, good afternoon first of all, and thank you, Doctor. I come from a subsector which unfortunately has a very small percentage presently in India, but seeing what the climate is doing to us, I believe it has a much better future. As a subset, I will concentrate only on the resilience aspects, and I'll be honest with you, the glass will not only be half full, it will also be half empty. I work for the World Nuclear Association, but as you will see, nuclear power is fairly well integrated across the board from policy, guidance, safety, construction, and operations. And I have had the somewhat unique privilege of having worked for all these three organizations. But currently, if you are to ask anywhere to build a nuclear power plant, I'm sure 99.9% of the time, it will be one of our members who would be building it, whether it be from law aspects, vendors, constructors, EPC contractors, operators. So when we share with you what I'm going to share, it would actually be the actual industry experience. Resilience has a very wide definition, but I prefer the definition that my friend Jeff had formulated some time back. And it is, and I find the Director General of the CDRI agrees with me, that it is the infrastructure should deliver its purpose throughout, and that is resilience. You do what you're supposed to do under various conditions, and you maintain and have as low a downtime as possible whenever a high magnitude event occurs. When you look at nuclear power, I think what nuclear power, some of the plants at least, have done is fairly unique in the power sector. I think we can raise a toast to Kaiga 1 of NPCIL India, which created a world record of operating for 962 days continuously. Unfortunately, it was beaten after a few weeks by a Canadian reactor, Darlington in Canada. I happened to be in Darlington when they were crossing 1,000 days, and they told me that the capacity factor for those 1,000 days had been more than 82%. And the current record of us stands with Darlington at 1,110 days. Well, I would like to say, seeing the Bombay roads, that even a road in Bombay does not last for 3 years. It has to be patched up. This has been possible largely because of a universal sense of quality mandated by the IAEA as a United Nations organ, followed by the industry worldwide, and very high level of training that is necessary, therefore good operations. Also, the material used generally is to something like an N stamp or equivalent standard. So that, of course, has other consequences. The top one is Kaiga, and the bottom one is Darlington. In economics, of course, everyone talks of high costs. But if I have negotiated a contract and I can then keep my promise for the next 60 to 80 years, then I think we have a very stable, economically viable project. It is, it may be a bit of a surprise to many people that nuclear power, particularly in the EU, has been found to be competitive, even when the discount rate is between 3 or even as high as 10%. The fuel is low in cost compared to cost of the plant. It is highly dense fuel, therefore a very small volume is required, and you could store it, therefore taking care of logistics, politics, volatility of the market, etc. But one more unique thing has happened in the nuclear power sector is the International Atomic Energy Agency has a World Bank now, where because of political reasons, if you are not able to get fuel, you can use the fuel from that bank. The resource is adequate, and I think the second last point should be of great interest, that amongst all power sectors, if you invest €1, it's an EU study, the nuclear industry contributes €4 to the GDP, the multiplier is 4. In fact, the World Bank thinks it's a slightly higher multiplier. And every direct job creates more than 3 jobs. From the financing point of view, the fact that it has been included in the EU taxonomy would permit many foreign firms to fund nuclear power plants. Of course, unfortunately, it has been included in the taxonomy only as a bridging technology like gas. These are the figures of tests of studies done by the OECD. And you'll find that it's competitive across a whole range of countries and a whole range of sectors. And as I was telling you, the World Bank, IMF seems to think that the impact of nuclear energy is 4.11, and the renewables and fossil fuels are there for all to see. And in fact, because of the adverse reaction to fossil fuel in the present context, they're actually less than 1. This is where the glass is half full and half empty. Everyone remembers Fukushima, very tragic. But luckily, no death related to radiation. But Unagawa, which is about 160 kilometers as the crow flies from Fukushima, survived. And the earthquake in Unagawa was slightly higher, it was 8.1, than it was in Fukushima. The tsunami was almost as high, but of course, the results were very distressing. This is how Fukushima ended up. And to me, this is the saddest part of the story, because this tidal wave, this height of the tidal wave had been known in Fukushima many, many years ago, of course, and the change that Unagawa did was a very simple change of raising this diesel generator emergency supply systems beyond the high tidal level. So, though we take credit in the nuclear industry that we share a lot, in this case, it wasn't. With sad. Well, everyone is talking climate and everyone is talking what happens with climate. And these are some figures that may be of interest, that where nuclear contributes to climate resiliency with low carbon emissions, with low acid in the air, with much, much lower land use. And I think this is particularly important for a country like ours, where amongst the larger countries of the world, we have the most adverse population to land ratio. Nuclear is not so good in water use, is probably second only to hydro, but it is very good in waste. The quantity of waste is very small, and the important thing is that the cost of waste management is integrated in the power development itself. It contributes less to air pollution, and therefore we do feel that in the longer term of human existence, it is a very resilient system. Uranium has only one use, and therefore its market is less volatile. Amongst all the major power generation systems, the total quantity of material used that you need to excavate from the earth is lowest for nuclear. And as we saw, that not only under LCOE, but under more advanced comparisons, nuclear does survive well. I was also asked to talk about SMRs, as you had wished, Doctor. When you have a new technology, then of course certain uncertainties come, but the way the reactors are being designed, they perhaps would be fueled for a much larger number of years than the present reactors, which have to be fueled every 18 months or 24 months. And there are system designs that are available at the R&D stage, definitely, not at the commercial stage yet, where reactors will be built with up to 10 years of fuel, and maybe you just change the whole reactor itself, because these are supposed to be at least transportable by rail. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Please.
Sir, regarding SMR, every developed nation doing R&D and commercial scale of SMR. So this SMR having flexibility and compatibility with the old thermal power plant, is it possible to use in a old thermal plant modified with SMR?
Thank you for your question. You are Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. You are ahead of the curve. Really, no reactor has been commercially employed yet. But for instance, these small modular reactors are already working in Russian icebreakers. And I am deliberately using the word icebreaker example because nothing can be tougher in terms of it is seeing 20 level of earthquake every time it breaks a big chunk of ice. So it is a very stable reactor. The mission time for these, icebreakers is not very large, but obviously the capability is available. Then the second thing is that these reactors would be largely built in the factory, so the quality can be assured. Their thinking is that particularly for reactors like molten salt reactors, which is a very old concept really, but was never commercialized. You could simply sort of fuel the reactor and forget it, because if you're not able to supply it, if it doesn't generate heat, then it will simply solidify. So there is no problem of the, what you call, radioactive material going out. It gets no. But in terms of time scale, I think that's a major interest. I think the next reactor that would be available from the Western world would take about 5 years. The Russians are already contracting with some countries to build offshore reactors, because they have been building offshore reactors. They have, I think, already established 2 in northern Siberia. And of course, in the United States, particularly the size of the plant that are being designed are to replace exactly what you said, to replace old coal plants. So that is the thinking. There are 2 limitations, of course. First of all, the regulator has to agree that there will be no exclusion zone of the size that we talk of standard reactors, because that would make it impossible to build there. And the second thing is that, are they really that safe? But a lot of this study would have been done before the commercialization. So the answer to your question, I would say, is between 5 to 10 years, you should be able to import a reactor in India, for instance, for any of the NTPC or other coal plants that you intend to shut down.
Thank you, sir.
Ben Fredam from GIZ again. Excuse me, sir. Is it true that EDF has major problems due to their nuclear power plants, so they're basically bankrupt because of that? Secondly, is it true that in the new nuclear power reactor in UK, the price is more than 10 rupees per unit, plus inflation adjustment, instead of having, let's say, offshore wind and solar for in India about 2.5 rupees? And my last question is, where would India put up its nuclear waste for the next 1 million year, completely safe, not accessible by Pakistan, missiles and anything similar?
Well, thank you for your question. Now, I would try to answer it not from the point of view of science, but from the point of view of belief first. That most systems that we build today were not thinkable 10 years ago. So I have enough belief in technology that the question of waste, for instance, that you raised, will be solved. India has done it in a modest way, but some of the other countries have done it in a much bigger way by recycling. And in fact, there was an informal application to the IAEA that nuclear should be considered as near renewable, because the technical demonstration has been for recycling of 4 times. So if I can dig up 1 kilogram of uranium, I can use it at least 4 times. This, like I'm avoiding digging up another 3 kilograms. As far as India is concerned, the policy just now is that we don't have a need to make what is called the deep geological repository. That is the official statement. So I would not like to go beyond that. The third thing is that as far as nuclear today is concerned, there is no other ready technology that can more or less guarantee that we can phase out fossil fuels. So yes, we are talking of many hopeful technologies, and I'm hopeful on that side also, whether it be renewables that can get very good, systems that can store energy, but honestly, no one has asked the question what happens to the waste from solar plants, what happens to the waste from wind, and most importantly, what is the radiation level from coal-fired plants. And I can assure you, there have been enough studies to say that a coal-powered plant releases more radiation than a nuclear power plant. I hope, but I come from the belief, yes, that we will be able to solve the question, both at this end of the spectrum, if you put, let us say, renewables, near renewables, and maybe even fossils. I hope at least partly I answered your question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We have the last but not the least, Mr. Yusuf Muhammad. Over to you.
I hope that maybe I am at the last, so that I'm not bored by my speech, but I have just only an imagination that what happens is in change of the climate. We are both India and Oman. I am from Middle East. We are sharing the same ocean, and frequently from the last like 15 years, there was a lot of cyclones, and either it hit Bangladesh or India, or it comes to the Middle East and Oman. And either ways, it have a lot of destruction. And this is where the resilience to the distribution companies and to the utilities become a very important point that everybody has to look at it. And the dilemma that we all normally face is that we are faced between three parties, is the regulator, the customers, and the utility. Normally the regulators want like an improvement in the services rather than decrease, but always minded that don't increase the cost. When it comes to the customer, he wants always like a continuous power, but at the end of the day, they always say that don't touch the tariff. We want a flat tariff. But everybody knows that the increase or anything that you need to improve, they have to have a cost for that. And this is where normally the utilities become in a struggle. I remember, for example, a quote of how to simplify the resilience. There is, as I said, there is a very difficult way of how everybody is looking at the resilience from his point of view. I give you an example. In the maybe the Middle East, we were faced mainly with the heat. The heat was one of the issues that do impact the resilience of the company asset, because of things get degraded, get cracked, and then once there is a small wind or small rain, it goes inside, and then it created an outage or a failure to the asset. Recently, what happens is that there was a change in the philosophy. There was like a cyclone, and the cyclone become more of wind resistance, become like an important part in our network. And at that time, sometimes what happens is that I remember on Oman, there was like the first cyclone happened in 2007. The second cyclone, everybody said that, okay, it happened one in every 100 years. But the second one happened just only 2010, 3 years ahead. So things become, okay, it's a mandate, we need to change. And there was, I think I heard about the changes from overhead line to underground cables, and then again, this is something which is very expensive, but might partly solve the issue. But what we have seen also that it's, sometimes you created a solution, but there is a side effect. The flooding and a lot of water flowing in the state could just dig the underground cable, damage it, and then it take a longer time to restore. So here where it comes like with the regulator, and we said N-1 and N-2 and double resources. It's always that the resilience has, okay, you have one source and you have another source, but normally you cannot afford this. So how to couple between intensive capital investment and between being very smart, and the introduction of smart grid, SCADA system, motorized RMUs, and also smart meters become now, a lot of information is flowing to the utility, so he is get with a lot of data that he wants to manage. I remember a case of smart meter being like, send a lot of alarms related to differences of voltage between phases. The company was not in a position to attend all this million of alerts, so they simply what they do is they switch it off. But is this what the resilience means? No, it's not. It's being smart on processing all those data and making sure that it do solve the issue. Something like again, I hear a good strategy say that disaster funding is something that maybe it's not there across the utility, so that the utility could take tab to those funding and make sure that again, okay, I increase the resilience of the network, not because there was like an issue in the service as provided, but because I want to put the next event. The asset is always operational, and the question is that the asset has to do what it was supposed to do. But can we design it for all scenarios? I think it's very difficult, and that's why we become that we need to balance between whatever it's there for the customer and what he can pay and whatever that the regulator is allowed. So as I said, with this is like a continuous dilemma that normally we need to live in a regular basis. And the utility has to always work with policymakers, has to work with the customers, because we need to listen to the customer, what is important to them, and also we need to listen to the policymaker to make sure that we have the strike of the balance between this. And thank you for listening to me.
Any questions to Yusuf? I think he has just summarized what got deliberated in this last 1.5 hours. Therefore, I don't want to come in between. The spirit that is going to be there with you all, maybe in the entertainment session, along with the dinner. Therefore, I was told that there is a spirit and also the various other entertainment program. Therefore, I think let us try to see that actually whatever the discussions or the debate, heated exchanges that are going to happen now will happen across the spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request Chairman WS to present a memento to all our panelists, speakers. So please. And co-chair also, please. To first of all, our session moderator, Dr. Rama Nagaraja. Mr. Matthias. Mr. Saurabh Shah. Our keynote address, Mr. Amit Proti, sir. Mr. Mohammad Kausar Amir Ali. Mr. Shah Nawaz Ahmed. And Mr. Yusuf Muhammad Al Maharuki. We request for a group photograph, please, in the front of the stage, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. There is an important information. We are going to have a gala dinner at JP Greens I request all the speakers, delegates who are present here to kindly join us for the gala dinner. This will start at 7 o'clock. We are arranging a bus from gate number 2. So I will share the bus number also. It is with me.